They mocked his old pickup truck until he opened the glove compartment. The old pickup truck had been the subject of jokes for as long as anyone could remember. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. People in town would laugh when they saw him driving it. They'd point, make snide comments about how it barely ran, how the paint was peeling off, how the seatbelts were more decorative than functional. They'd talk about how it looked like it should have been scrapped years ago. No one could understand why he kept it. To them, it was just an old rusted truck that didn't belong on the road. It wasn't the kind of vehicle you showed off. It wasn't the kind of vehicle you even cared about. But for him, it wasn't about what people thought or how it looked. The truck had been with him through everything. It had been there when he and his wife had bought their first house, when they'd brought their first child home from the hospital, when they'd traveled to the places they'd dreamed about. It wasn't just a truck. It was a symbol of his life. The years, the memories, the milestones, all packed into that truck. And every morning, he drove it to work without thinking twice. The laughter, the comments, they didn't bother him as much as they once had. Over the years, he had gotten used to it. It was just the way people saw the truck, something to mock, something to laugh at. He never defended it. But there were times, moments when the jokes went a little too far, that he felt the sting of their words. People didn't know what the truck meant to him. One morning, after hearing another round of laughs from the usual crowd at the diner, he decided he'd had enough. He had driven to town, parked in his usual spot, and was walking inside when a couple of men started laughing again. They stood by the window, pointing at his truck and making jokes about how it probably wouldn't make it through the day, how it might break down in the middle of the street, how it was a relic from another time. They laughed like it was funny, like they could see the truck as nothing more than a joke. He stood at the door of the diner, his hand on the handle, and for the first time in years, he felt something snap. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He just felt tired. Tired of the same thing. Tired of never being asked why he drove it. Tired of feeling like it was all just a joke to everyone else. He opened the door, walked inside, and sat down at the counter. The usual chatter continued, but this time, he didn't join in. This time, he didn't laugh along with them. He sat there, his hands folded in front of him, until they noticed he wasn't smiling. He wasn't reacting the way they expected him to. Finally, one of the men turned to him with a smirk. "You still driving that old thing?" he asked, motioning toward the window where the truck sat parked outside. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a deep breath. Then he spoke, not in anger, but with quiet clarity. "You know, that truck's been with me through a lot more than you can imagine. It's been with me through the best times and the worst times. It's more than just a vehicle to me. It's a part of my life. It's seen the things I've been through, and I've never once thought of getting rid of it." There was a brief silence in the diner as everyone listened, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't looking for an apology. He wasn't asking for their approval. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was just speaking the truth, something he had never shared with anyone. "The thing is," he continued, "people always talk about things like they're just stuff. They're just objects. But that truck, that's more than that. It's not about the way it looks. It's about what it's carried, the memories, the family, the years. And it's still here, still running, still showing up every day, even when people think it shouldn't be." The room was quieter now, the laughter gone. The usual chatter had stopped, and no one knew what to say. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had shared something real, something they couldn't laugh off or dismiss. He looked out the window at the truck, his eyes softening a little. "I know it's not much to you, but it's everything to me." The man stood up slowly, paid for his coffee, and walked out of the diner without looking back. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to defend the truck. It wasn't about that. It was about knowing what it meant to him, knowing what it had represented all these years. And as he walked back to his truck, he felt something lift off his shoulders. He had stopped letting the jokes define him. He had stopped letting the laughter shape his worth. The truck was still there, just as it had always been, and that was enough. The next morning, as the man drove his old pickup truck back into town, he could feel the weight of the previous day's conversation still lingering. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. But there was something different. Something he couldn't quite shake off. Maybe it was the way the words had hung in the air in the diner, the way everyone had listened for the first time instead of laughing. Maybe it was the quiet respect that had filled the room, even if no one had said anything. The truck rattled as it made its way down the familiar road. The sound had become a part of the journey. The man didn't notice it anymore, just like he didn't notice the dents or the fading paint. It was just part of the truck, part of the life he had lived with it. As he pulled into his usual spot outside the diner, he could see the group of men sitting by the window again. They were talking, the same as always. A couple of them turned to look at the truck as he parked, but none of them said anything. For a moment, the man just sat there in the driver's seat, the engine idling, thinking about what had happened the day before. He hadn't expected to say anything, let alone speak the truth about the truck. But he had, and it felt good. It felt right. He turned off the engine and got out, locking the door behind him. As he walked toward the diner, he could feel the weight of their eyes on him. But this time, he didn't mind. This time, he didn't feel the need to defend his truck. The truth was out there now, and whether they understood or not, didn't matter. When he walked inside, the usual chatter didn't stop like it had the day before. It was still loud, still casual, but this time, there was a shift. The group of men didn't mock him. They didn't laugh at his truck. They didn't ignore him either. Instead, they looked up, a little quieter than usual, but not in an uncomfortable way. More like they were trying to decide how to approach him. He took his usual seat at the counter, his coffee already waiting for him. He didn't look up at the men immediately. He just sat there, his hands wrapped around the cup, letting the warmth settle in. He wasn't looking for an apology, and he wasn't expecting one. He had spoken the truth. And if they understood, if they didn't, that was fine. Finally, one of the men, a familiar face who usually didn't hesitate to crack jokes, looked over at him. I wanted to say sorry about yesterday," he said, his voice a little unsure. The man didn't look up right away. He just took a sip of his coffee, letting the words hang in the air. "You don't have to apologize," the man said quietly, finally meeting the man's gaze. "You didn't know. It's fine." The man who had spoken nodded, looking down at his coffee cup. "It's just, well, I guess we didn't really think about it. You know, about what the truck means to you. I mean, we were just messing around." The man nodded. "It's okay. I've been used to it for a long time." The others in the group shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances but not saying anything. The man didn't feel the need to say more. The truth was already out, and sometimes that was all it took. Sometimes the simplest truths were the hardest to share, but once they were out, they had a way of changing things. After a long pause, the man who had apologized spoke again. "You know, I didn't realize it, but I kind of get it now. The truck's got character. It's been through a lot with you. I respect that." The man smiled, not because he was seeking their approval, but because it felt like the first time they were really seeing him. Not for the truck, not for the jokes, but for the man behind the wheel. And that was all he had ever wanted. "You don't have to get it," the man said softly, "but I appreciate it." The conversation drifted into other topics, the usual small talk about the weather, sports, and the goings-on in town. But the atmosphere had changed. The laughter had stopped. The man felt lighter, like something had been lifted without him even trying. When he finished his coffee, he stood up to leave. The group watched him, but this time there was no laughter, no ridicule, just a quiet acknowledgement. He walked toward the door, his hand on the handle when he heard one of them call out. "Hey, we'll see you around," the man said. The man turned to look back, a small smile on his face. "Yeah, I'll see you around." As he stepped outside into the cool morning air, the familiar rattle of the truck was waiting for him. But this time, it didn't feel like a joke. This time, it felt like a part of him. And maybe, just maybe, the town was starting to understand that too. The next few days passed quietly, but something about the man felt different. It wasn't a dramatic change, but there was a shift. He could tell that the people in town were looking at him differently. He wasn't sure what had changed in the few days since the diner incident. It wasn't as if everyone suddenly saw his truck the way he did, as a piece of history, a symbol of all the years and memories it carried. But something had clicked. The laughter had stopped. The jokes had stopped being jokes. And now, the truck wasn't just the subject of ridicule. It was part of the quiet respect people had started to show him. The fact that they had stopped mocking it, that they had stopped mocking him, was enough. That morning, as he walked out to his truck to drive to work, he noticed a few more people staring at it. He got into his truck as he always did. As he drove through town, he noticed the people who had been so quick to mock him before, now looking at him with something else in their eyes, something more subtle, a quiet understanding. At the diner that morning, there were fewer eyes on him. It was as though the man had been given a little more space to be who he was. The booth where he usually sat was empty, and he took his seat at the counter, a little earlier than usual. The usual group was there, as always, but this time they didn't greet him with the same kind of teasing smile. They just nodded, and one of them, Tom, the one who had apologized a few days before, gave him a small, friendly smile. "Morning," Tom said, breaking the silence. "Morning," the man replied, not looking for a conversation but appreciating the gesture. Tom seemed to think for a second before speaking again. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask, what's the story with the truck?" The question caught him off guard. It was just a genuine question, asked without judgment. The man looked at Tom for a moment before answering, his voice steady, but with a hint of the same warmth that had come over him when he had shared his thoughts about the truck the other day. "It's been with me for a long time," he said simply. "It's seen a lot. It's been through the highs and the lows with me, and I guess it just stuck around because it never gave up on me." Tom nodded, like he was processing the answer. He didn't push further. He didn't need to. "I get it now," Tom said quietly. "I didn't understand before, but now, I get it." The conversation shifted after that, just like the last time. The usual chatter resumed, but it was different. There was a new layer of respect in the air. Not because of anything grand, but because the man had shared something real. That truck was a part of who he was, no matter what anyone else thought. The days that followed felt quieter, but in a good way. The man had gotten used to the fact that people in town had stopped mocking him. The truck had become something that was no longer an object of ridicule. It had become a piece of the town's fabric, like everything else that had been around long enough to become familiar. One evening, as he drove through the familiar streets on his way home, he noticed something that made him stop. A young man, not much older than his own son had been when he left home, was sitting on the curb near the edge of town, staring at the truck. His eyes were fixed on it, as if he was seeing something in it that the others had never bothered to look for. The man slowed down, watching the young man from a distance. The young man was looking at the truck, like he was seeing more than just the rust and the dents. He couldn't explain why, but something told him this wasn't just another person mocking his truck. Curious, he pulled over and parked on the side of the road. He got out, closing the door softly behind him. The young man didn't notice him at first, too focused on the truck. It wasn't until the man took a few steps forward that the young man looked up, startled. "Hey there," the man called, trying to sound casual. The young man stood up quickly, wiping his hands on his jeans, a little embarrassed, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Sorry," the young man said, almost apologetically. I don't know. I've seen that truck a lot around town. Never really thought much about it before. But I guess I was just wondering." The man nodded, understanding the hesitation in the young man's voice. "Wondering what?" The young man took a step closer to the truck. "Well, I was just wondering why you still drive it. It looks old." The man smiled to himself, not in a mocking way, but because it was the question he had always expected people to ask, but never did. He had never minded the question, but this time it felt different. "It's not just about how it looks," the man said slowly, walking over to the truck. He rested a hand on the worn-out door, just like he had done 1,000 times before. "This truck's been through everything with me. It's been with me for years, through the best days and the hardest ones." The young man looked at him, his eyes now focused on the truck. "But it's got dents." "It's got more than that," the man interrupted gently, smiling at the young man's concern. "It's got stories. It's seen me through things I can't even explain." The young man was quiet for a moment, as if he was processing the words. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly thinking. "I never thought about it that way," the young man admitted. "I always just saw it as, well, an old truck." The man chuckled softly. "Yeah, that's what most people see when they look at it. They don't see the memories, the days spent driving across town with people I care about. They don't see the road trips, the family vacations, or the way it's been with me through it all." The young man nodded slowly, finally understanding. I guess I never realized it had a history. It's just a truck to most people, but to you, it's more than that, huh?" The man looked out over the truck, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, it's more than that." For a moment, the two of them stood there in silence. It was a peaceful moment, one the man hadn't expected to have with a stranger, but one that felt right. Maybe the young man didn't fully understand. Not yet. But there was something about the way he looked at the truck now, like he had finally seen it for what it really was. "Well," the man said after a while, "I need to get home, but you keep looking at it if you want." The young man smiled, still standing near the truck. "I think I'll take a closer look." The man nodded. "Take care of yourself." He turned and got back into the truck, watching the young man from the corner of his eye as he drove away. The truck was still there, still just as it had always been, but now it felt like it had more meaning. Not because of the history it carried, but because someone else had taken the time to see it. And that made all the difference. The man drove his truck to the diner the next morning. He parked in his usual spot, the engine rattling as it came to a stop. The truck had its own rhythm, its own way of making its presence known. As he stepped out of the truck, he couldn't help but notice something had shifted. The usual banter from the group of men was absent. No one had said anything when he walked in. He glanced around. The usual group was still there. No one laughed. He could feel the weight of their stares. He wasn't sure if it was because of the conversation he'd had the day before, but the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't tense, but it was quieter, more thoughtful. Tom, the same man who had apologized the other day, was the first to break the silence. He looked up at the man, his face a little more serious than usual. "You weren't here yesterday," Tom said, his voice softer than it had been before. "We noticed." The man nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "Had some things to take care of," he replied simply, not wanting to go into detail. Tom hesitated before continuing. "We've been talking. About you. About the truck." The man raised an eyebrow, not sure if he wanted to hear where this was going. "You know," Tom went on, "we didn't really get it before, why you still drive that old thing. But after you talked, after you shared all that, I think I get it now. It's not just a truck. It's part of who you are. It's more than just what it looks like or how old it is." The man looked at Tom, not sure how to respond. He hadn't expected an apology or understanding, but hearing it, seeing the change in the way they looked at him, felt like something had shifted. Something subtle, but important. "I don't need anyone to get it," the man said quietly. "It's just a part of my life. It's not about impressing anyone. It's just about what it's been through with me." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that now. And I guess I'm sorry for not seeing it before." The man smiled, a small, genuine smile. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. It was just a simple truth that had been shared, and now it felt like they could all move forward. "Don't worry about it," the man said. "It's not about apologies. It's about understanding." There was a brief silence between them before another man in the group spoke up. "We've been talking, too," he said, "and we were thinking maybe we could help. With the truck. You know, fix it up a little, give it some new life." The man was quiet for a moment, unsure how to react. He hadn't expected that. The truck had been with him for so long. It had been through everything, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to change it. But at the same time, the idea of it getting a little help, of being cared for the way it had cared for him, felt like something worth considering. "I appreciate that," the man said finally, his voice steady. "But it's not about fixing it up. It's about what it means to me, as it is. Sometimes, things don't need to be shiny or perfect. They just need to be what they are." The men seemed to understand, nodding in agreement. As he finished his coffee and stood up to leave, the group watched him in a way they hadn't before. It wasn't with mockery. It wasn't with pity. It was just with an unspoken acknowledgement of who he was, of the story behind the truck, of the life that had been lived in it. "See you around," Tom said with a nod. The man smiled. "Yeah, see you around." As he walked out of the diner and back to his truck, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The man's truck sat in the driveway that evening. The rust was still there, the faded paint still a reminder of all the places it had been. He looked out the window at it, his hands resting on the kitchen counter. For a moment, he thought about how things had shifted. He knew it was more than just about the truck anymore. That night, as he sat in the living room, his mind wandered back to all the years with the truck. The trips he had taken with his wife, with his children, the places they had gone, the moments they had shared. He remembered the first time he drove it off the lot, how proud he had been, even though it wasn't much then. It was a simple truck, but to him, it was everything. He had never really told anyone what it meant to him. The truck was just there, a part of the daily routine. It wasn't about the truck itself. It was about the memories, the family, the life he had built. The truck had always been there, never asking for anything in return. It had been a part of him, a silent witness to all the years, the ups and downs, the triumphs and failures. That evening, as he walked out the door, he saw something different. He wasn't sure what exactly, but he felt it. The truck had always been a part of his life, but now it felt like it had taken on a new meaning, not just for him, but for everyone who had taken the time to listen, to understand. It was a symbol of resilience, of memories that couldn't be erased. As he stood by the truck, looking at it for a moment, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Tom, the man from the diner, walking toward him. Tom had a small smile on his face, but there was something more in his expression, something unspoken. "Hey," Tom said, his voice soft. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about the truck." The man nodded, not sure where this conversation was headed. "Yeah? I just wanted to say..." Tom paused for a moment, like he was searching for the right words. "I never really understood. I never really got why you kept it. But I think I do now. It's not just a truck. It's a part of you. A part of your life." The man didn't know what to say. He didn't need Tom's approval, but hearing it felt like a quiet victory, like something he had never expected was finally being understood. Tom took a step closer, looking at the truck with a kind of reverence. "I think it's pretty damn cool, to be honest," he said with a grin. "You've kept it going for this long. It's like it's got its own story, just like you do." The man smiled, feeling something warm stir inside him. Maybe it wasn't about the truck being shiny or new. Maybe it was about what it represented. About the years, the memories, the stories that had been lived in it. "I appreciate that," the man said quietly. "I really do." They stood there for a few moments, side by side, both looking at the truck in a new light. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a part of their town's history, a part of the man's history. And for the first time, the man realized that he didn't need to explain that to anyone. He didn't need anyone else to see what he saw. But it felt good to know that, at least for Tom, the truck had become more than just a joke. "Well," Tom said, turning to leave, "I'll let you get back to it. But just know, if you ever need help with anything, fixing it up or whatever, you know where to find me." The man nodded. "I appreciate that. But for now, I think it's just fine as it is." Tom grinned, giving a friendly wave as he walked away. The man watched him go, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the man stood there for a moment longer, his hand resting on the truck, feeling the years in the worn leather of the steering wheel, the quiet hum of the engine. The next few weeks felt like a strange sort of calm had settled over the man's life. People looked at him differently now, not because he was any different, but because they had seen him for who he really was. He had spent more time driving the truck, not because he needed to go anywhere, but because it felt good to be in it. The road trips he used to take with his family, the long drives with his wife by his side, the quiet mornings when the only company was the truck and the open road, those memories seemed to come back to him more vividly now. One evening as he was driving home from the diner, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. It was Tom again, standing by his truck, just like the day they had spoken. But this time, Tom wasn't just looking at the truck. He was standing there with a small toolbox in hand. The man slowed the truck down as he pulled into the driveway. He wasn't sure what was happening. He parked the truck and got out, walking toward Tom, who was now kneeling by the front tire. "Hey, what are you doing?" the man asked, not sure if he should be laughing or asking in earnest. Tom stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I thought you might need a hand," he said. "You mentioned you didn't want to fix it up, but I was thinking maybe a little help wouldn't hurt. Not to make it new, but just to give it a little love." The man blinked in surprise, not expecting this at all. He had never really thought about fixing the truck, not in the way people thought about fixing things. But Tom was offering something different, not to change it, but to maintain it, to keep it running, to keep it moving. "I appreciate the offer," the man said slowly, "but it's just an old truck." Tom shrugged. "Maybe, but it's not just any old truck, is it?" The man smiled at that, realizing the truth in Tom's words. "I guess not." "I've been thinking about what you said," Tom continued, standing up and stretching his back, "about how the truck's more than just a vehicle. It's part of your life, part of your history, and you shouldn't let it fall apart just because it's old. It's earned the right to keep going, and so have you." The man didn't know what to say. There was a warmth in Tom's voice, a sincerity that made it hard to brush off. Tom wasn't offering to fix the truck out of pity. He wasn't offering to make it new. He was offering to give it the care it deserved, the kind of care that the man had given it for years without asking for anything in return. "You don't have to do this," the man said, but the words felt hollow as soon as they left his mouth. He knew he didn't really mean it. He didn't mind the help. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see that it wasn't about doing it alone anymore. "I know," Tom said with a grin, "but I think it's the least I can do. A truck that's been through so much deserves a little attention, right?" The man chuckled, his heart a little lighter than it had been in days. "I suppose so." For the next hour, Tom worked on the truck with him, replacing a few worn parts, tightening bolts, checking the tires. It wasn't a complete overhaul. It wasn't going to make the truck look brand new, but it was enough. Enough to show that it mattered. Enough to show that the things we carry with us, the things that are part of our lives, deserve the attention they need to keep going. As they finished up, Tom stood back, wiping his hands on a rag. "There you go," he said. "It's not much, but it'll keep running a little longer." The man looked at the truck, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't about fixing the truck, he realized. It was about honoring the memories, honoring the past, and making sure it could keep going. "Thanks, Tom," the man said, his voice thick with gratitude. Tom smiled, slapping him on the back. "No problem. Just keep driving it." As Tom walked away, the man stood there for a moment, looking at the truck. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. The next few weeks passed by in a blur of small changes, quiet moments, and an unexpected sense of gratitude that had settled over the man. The truck, his old, faithful companion, had a fresh coat of attention, not perfection, but enough to keep it running strong. One afternoon, as he was getting into the truck to head out to the hardware store, he noticed a small group of people gathered by the diner. He didn't recognize them immediately, but they were looking at the truck. At first, he thought nothing of it, but as he pulled into the lot, he saw the young man who had been standing by the truck weeks ago, the one who had taken the time to really look at it. This time, the young man wasn't alone. He was with a couple of friends, all of them standing around his truck, talking in low voices. The man parked the truck and got out. But when the young man looked up and saw him, his face broke into a smile, and the group fell silent. "Hey," the young man said, his voice filled with something like respect. "We were just talking about your truck. I, told them the story, about how it's been with you for so long." The man paused for a moment, feeling a bit unsure of what to say. The young man had clearly shared what he had learned, but hearing it from others, hearing them recognize what the truck represented, felt different. "You did?" the man asked, not sure whether he should laugh or just smile. The young man nodded, his friends now looking at the truck with a different kind of curiosity. "Yeah, we were just saying, it's not just a truck. It's like it has its own story." The man smiled. It wasn't often that someone took the time to see what he had always seen in the truck. But now, in this small moment, the truck wasn't just a piece of metal. It was something shared, something that carried meaning beyond what the world saw on the surface. The young man's friends began to nod, slowly understanding what they had missed before. They had spent so much time laughing at the truck, at its worn-out appearance, never realizing that the true value wasn't in its looks, but in the life it had seen, in the stories it had carried. "You know," one of the young man's friends said, his voice thoughtful, "I think we've all been wrong about that truck. It's not just some beat-up thing. It's a part of you." The man nodded, not sure what to say. He wasn't looking for validation, but hearing them talk about the truck like this, hearing them understand, felt like something he hadn't expected. It wasn't about making them see it his way. It was about them seeing it in their own way, seeing beyond the surface. After a moment, the young man looked up at him, his eyes bright with a kind of realization. "I don't know why we thought it was just old and useless. It's like you said. It's part of you. It's part of your life." The man glanced over at the truck, feeling the weight of its significance. It was about the life he had lived with it. And maybe the young man and his friends were starting to see that too. The group began to disperse, slowly, one by one. But as they walked away, the young man turned back to the man, his expression sincere. "I think we all owe you an apology," he said quietly, "for laughing, for thinking we knew what it was." The man looked at him and smiled, shaking his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just take the time to see the things around you. You might be surprised what you find." The young man nodded, a small smile on his face before he turned and walked off with his friends, leaving the man standing there by the truck. The truck wasn't just his anymore. It had become a part of something bigger, something that went beyond what anyone had expected. As he climbed into the truck and started the engine, the familiar rattle sounded and he smiled. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about the truck at all. It was about the stories we share and the moments we recognize along the way. The man woke up early the next morning, as he usually did. The sun was still low, casting a soft light over the town. It had been a few months since that conversation at the diner, and in that time, things had settled into a kind of rhythm. The truck, his old truck, had become a symbol in the town, not just for him, but for others too. People who had once mocked it now stopped to admire it. The young man and his friends had come to him more than once, asking questions, asking to hear more of the stories, and the man had been happy to share. But today, as he stood outside his house, looking at the truck, he felt something different. For the first time, he felt ready to share it in a way that was different. He got into the truck, the engine coughing to life with a familiar sound. He drove into town slowly, feeling the weight of the memories in every bump, every rattle, every turn of the wheel. The truck had been through everything with him. His life, his family, his struggles. It was as much a part of him as anything else. As he pulled into the diner parking lot, he saw a few familiar faces. Tom was there, sitting at the counter, his coffee in front of him. The man parked the truck and got out, walking toward the diner. The group of men was there, as usual. "Morning," Tom said as the man sat down at the counter. "Morning," the man replied, nodding toward the group. He could feel their eyes on him, but not in the way they had been before. They weren't judging him. They weren't mocking him. They were just looking at him, like they understood something that had taken a long time to get to. "I was talking to a few people yesterday," Tom said quietly. "They were asking about your truck again, wondering how it's held up all these years." The man smiled, not surprised. The truck had become a kind of legend in the town now, a symbol of something more than just a vehicle. "I've told them everything I can," the man said, his voice steady. "It's not about how it looks. It's about what it's been through, what it's carried." Tom nodded, his face thoughtful. "You've taught us something, you know, about holding on to things that matter, about seeing things for what they really are." The man didn't say anything for a moment, letting the words settle. It wasn't about the truck. It never had been. It was about the understanding that came when people stopped looking at the surface and started seeing the real story behind it. "I think I get it now," Tom said finally, glancing around at the group. "We all get it. It's not just about a truck. It's about a life." The group fell silent for a moment, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a way that felt more like a shared understanding. The man looked at them, one by one, and realized that they hadn't just heard him. They had listened. There was something more between them, a bond that had formed out of respect. As he walked back to his truck, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. He climbed into the driver's seat. He didn't look back at the diner. He didn't need to. The truck had done its job. It had carried him through years of laughter, struggles, and silence. And now, it had carried him into a new understanding. The road stretched out in front of him. He didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the past alone. The truck had always been a part of him. And now, so had the people around him. They had all seen what he had known for so long. As the truck rumbled down the road, the man smiled. It wasn't just a truck. It was a story that was still unfolding. A story that was still being told. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.